Hello there, Internet. This is Broadzilla, and I'm in my pajamas, and I'm ready for bed, but not without my story. Tonight I'm going to be reading Goldilocks and the Three Bears first, and then we're going to continue with Chapter 2 of The Magician's Nephew. Alright, so just give me a sec. Let me find the front of this book, and we'll go from there. This particular version of Goldilocks is illustrated by Jan Brett. I love her illustrations. She always has all of these fun things in the margins and stuff. So it's like all this extra stuff is happening. She has so much beautiful detail in the illustrations. I wish I had a good way of showing everybody. But, alright, let's get going. Once upon a time, there were three bears who lived together in a house of their own in a wood. One of them was a little, small, wee bear, and one was a middle-sized bear, and the other was a great, huge bear. They're all wearing such cute little clothes. They each had a bowl for their porridge, a little bowl for the little, small, wee bear, a middle-sized bowl for the middle-sized bear, and a great, huge bowl for the great, huge bear. And they each had a chair to sit in. A little chair for the little small wee bear, a middle-sized chair for the middle-sized bear, and a great huge chair for a great huge bear. And they each had a bed to sleep in. A little bed for the little small wee bear, a middle-sized bed for the middle-sized bear, and a great huge bed for the great huge bear. One day, after they had made their porridge for breakfast and poured it into their porridge bowls, they walked out into the woods while the porridge was cooling. And while they were walking, a little girl named Goldilocks came to their house. First, she looked in at the window, and then she peeped in at the keyhole, and seeing no one was at home, she lifted the latch. The door opened for her, and she went in. It's not very polite, is it? How pleased Goldilocks was when she saw the steaming porridge on the table. The sweet smell of the porridge with roasted nuts, honey, and berries filled the room. It was so tempting that Goldilocks set about helping herself. First, she tasted the porridge of the great huge bear, but it was too hot. Then she tasted the porridge for the middle-sized bear, but it was too cold. And then she tried the porridge of the little small wee bear, and it was neither too hot nor too cold. It was just right. She liked it so much she ate it all up. Then Goldilocks sat down in the chair of the great huge bear, but it was too hard for her. Then she sat down in the chair of the middle-sized bear, but it was too soft for her. Then she sat down in the chair of the little small wee bear, and this chair was neither too hard nor too soft, but just right, so Goldilocks seated herself in it, and there she sat until the bottom of the chair gave way, and she came plump upon the floor. Then Goldilocks went upstairs to the bedroom in which the three bears slept. First, she lay down upon the bed of the great huge bear, but that was too high at the head for her. Next, she lay down upon the bed of the middle-sized bear, but that was too high at the foot for her. Then she laid down upon the bed of the Little Small Wee Bear, and that was neither too high at the head nor foot, but just right. So she covered herself up comfortably and fell fast asleep. By this time the 3 bears thought their porridge would be cool enough to eat, so they returned home for breakfast. Now Goldilocks had left the spoon of the Great Huge Bear standing in his porridge. "Somebody has been at my porridge," said the Great Huge Bear in his great rough, gruff voice. When the middle-sized bear looked at hers, she saw that the spoon was standing in it too. "Somebody has been at my porridge," said the middle-sized bear in her middle voice. And then the Little Small Wee Bear looked at his bowl, and the spoon was in the porridge bowl, but the porridge was all gone. "Somebody has been at my porridge and has eaten it all up," said the Little Small Wee Bear in his little small wee voice. Upon this, the 3 bears, seeing that someone had entered their house and eaten up Little Small Wee Bear's breakfast, began to look around them. Now Goldilocks had not put the hard cushion straight when she rose from the chair of the Great Huge Bear. "Somebody has been sitting in my chair," said the Great Huge Bear in his great rough, gruff voice. And Goldilocks had crumpled the soft cushion of the middle-sized bear. "Somebody has been sitting in my chair," said the middle-sized bear in her middle voice. And you know what Goldilocks had done to the 3rd chair. Somebody has been sitting in my chair and has sat the bottom right out of it," said the Little Small Wee Bear in his little small wee voice. Then the bears thought it necessary that they should make a further search, so they went upstairs to their bedroom. Now Goldilocks had pulled the pillow off the Great Huge Bear out of place. "Somebody has been lying in my bed," said the Great Huge Bear in his great rough, gruff voice. And Goldilocks had pulled the cover off the middle-sized bear out of place. "Somebody has been lying in my bed," said the middle-sized bear in her middle voice. And then the Little Small Wee Bear came to look at his bed. There was Goldilocks, sleeping peacefully, her long shiny braids spread across the pillow. Little Small Wee Bear just stared at her for a moment and didn't say anything. Then he cried, "Somebody has been sleeping in my bed, and here she is!" Goldilocks had heard in her sleep the great rough, gruff voice of the Great Huge Bear and the middle voice of the middle-sized bear, but it was only as if she'd heard someone speaking in a dream. But when she heard the Little Small Wee voice of the Little Small Wee Bear, it was so sharp and so shrill and so like her own that it awakened her at once. Up she started, but when she saw the 3 bears on one side of the bed, she tumbled herself off the other and ran to the window. Out Goldilocks jumped and ran away as fast as she could, not looking behind her, and she was very far away. And what happened to Goldilocks afterward, no one can tell, but the 3 bears never saw anything more of her. The end. And that was Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, illustrated by Jan Brett. She also wrote the retelling. So this was, I guess, written and illustrated. But definitely worthwhile, if for no other reason than the illustrations. Alrighty. Next up, we are going to continue with Chapter 2 of The Magician's Nephew, the first book in the Chronicles of Narnia series. It's also the artwork that's on the screen here. It's like my favorite version of that cover, too. There's been tons. Let me just get myself situated and we'll get rolling. By the way, if you missed Chapter 1, it has been uploaded in the videos section, both here on Twitch as well as on my YouTube channel. So have that if you missed the first one. All right, Chapter 2, Diggory and his Uncle. It was so sudden and so horribly unlike anything that had ever happened to Diggory, even in a nightmare, that he let out a scream. Instantly, Uncle Andrew's hand was over his mouth. "None of that," he hissed in Diggory's ear. "If you start making a noise, your mother'll hear it, and you know what a fright might do to her." As Diggory said afterward, the horrible meanness of getting at a chap in that way almost made him sick. Of course, he didn't scream again. "That's better," said Uncle Andrew. "Perhaps you couldn't help it. It is a shock when you first see someone vanish. Why, it even gave me a turn when the guinea pig did it just the other night." "Was that when you yelled?" said Diggory. "Oh, you heard that, did you? I hope you haven't been spying on me." "No, I haven't," said Diggory indignantly. "But what's happened to Polly?" "Congratulate me, my dear boy," said Uncle Andrew, rubbing his hands. "My experiment has succeeded. The little girl's gone. Vanished right out of the world." "What have you done to her?" "Sent her to another place." "What do you mean?" asked Diggory. Uncle Andrew sat down and said, "Well, I'll tell you all about it. Have you heard of old Miss LeFay?" "Wasn't she a great aunt or something?" said Diggory. "Not exactly," said Uncle Andrew. "She was my grandmother. That's her there on the wall." Diggory looked and saw a faded photograph. It showed the face of an old woman in a bonnet, and he could now remember that he had once seen a photo of the same face in an old drawer at home in the country. He had asked his mother who it was, and Mother had not seemed to want to talk about the subject much. It was not at all a nice face, Diggory thought, though, of course, with those early photographs one could never really tell. Wasn't there something wrong about her, Uncle Andrew? He asked. "Well," said Uncle Andrew with a chuckle, "it depends on what you call wrong. Most people are so narrow-minded. She certainly got very queer in later life. Did very unwise things. That's why they shut her up." "In an asylum, do you mean?" "Oh, no, said Uncle Andrew in a shocked voice. "Nothing of that sort. Only in prison." "I say," said Diggory, "what had she done?" "Ah, poor woman," said Uncle Andrew. "She had been very unwise. There was a good many different things. We needn't go into all that. She was always very kind to me." "But look here, what does all this have to do with Polly? I do wish you'd—" "All in good time, my boy," said Uncle Andrew. "They let old Miss LeFay out before she died, and I was one of the very few people whom she would allow to see her in her last illness. She had got to dislike ordinary, ignorant people, you understand. I do myself, but she and I were interested in the same sort of things. It was only a few days before her death that she told me to go to an old bureau in her house and open a secret drawer and bring her a little box that I would find there. The moment I picked up that box, I could tell by the pricking in my fingers that I held some great secret in my hands. She gave it to me and made me promise that as soon as she was dead I would burn it, unopened, with certain ceremonies. That promise I did not keep." "Well, then, it was just rotten of you," said Diggory. "Rotten?" said Uncle Andrew with a puzzled look. "Oh, I see. You mean that little boys ought to keep their promises. Very true. Most right and proper, I'm sure, and I'm very glad you have been taught to do it. But of course you must understand that rules of that sort, however excellent they may be for little boys, and servants, and women, and even people in general, can't possibly expected to apply to profound students and great thinkers and sages. No, Diggory, men like me, who possess hidden wisdom, are freed from common rules, just as we are cut off from common pleasures. Ours, my boy, is a high and lonely destiny." As he said this, he sighed and looked so grave and noble and mysterious that for a second Diggory really thought he was saying something rather fine. And then he remembered the ugly look he had seen in his uncle's face the moment before Polly had vanished, and all at once he saw through Uncle Andrew's grand words. "All it means," he said to himself, "is that he thinks he can do anything he likes and get anything he wants." "Of course," said Uncle Andrew, "I didn't dare open the box for a long time, for I knew it might contain something highly dangerous. For my godmother it was a very remarkable woman. The truth is, she was one of the last mortals in this country who had fairy blood in her. She said there had been 2 others in her time. One was a duchess, and the other a charwoman. In fact, Diggory, you are now talking to the last man, possibly, who really had a fairy godmother. There, that'll be something for you to remember when you're an old man yourself." "I'll bet she was a bad fairy," thought Diggory, and added out loud, "But what about Polly?" "How you do harp on that," said Uncle Andrew, "as if that was what mattered. First, my task was to, of course, study the box itself. It was very ancient, and I knew enough even then to know that it wasn't Greek, or old Egyptian, or Babylonian, or Hittite, or Chinese. It was older than any of those nations. That was a great day when at last I found out the truth. The box was Atlantean. It came from the lost island of Atlantis. That meant it was centuries older than any of the Stone Age things they dig up in Europe. And it wasn't a rough, crude thing like them either, for in the very dawn of time Atlantis was already a great city with palaces and temples and learned men." He paused for a moment, as if he expected Diggory to say something, but Diggory was liking his uncle more every minute, and so he said nothing. "Meanwhile," continued Uncle Andrew, "I was learning a good deal in other ways. It wouldn't be proper to explain them to a child. About magic in general. That meant that I came to have a fair idea of what sort of things might be in the box. By various tests I narrowed down the possibilities. I had to get to know some, some devilish queer people, and go through some very disagreeable experiences. That was what turned my head gray. One doesn't become a magician for nothing. My health broke down in the end, but I got better, and at last I actually knew." Although there was not really the least chance of anyone overhearing them, he leaned forward and almost whispered as he said, "The Atlantean box contained something that had been brought from another world when our world was only just beginning." "What?" said Diggory, who was now interested in spite of himself. "Only dust," said Andrew. "Fine, dry dust. Nothing much to look at. Not much to show for a lifetime of toil, you might say. But when I looked at that dust, I took jolly good care not to touch it, and thought that every grain had once been in another world. I don't mean another planet, you know. There's part of our world, and you could get to them if you went far enough. But a really other world, another nature, another universe. Somewhere you would never reach, even if you traveled through space, the space of this universe forever and ever. A world that could be reached only by magic. Well," here Uncle Andrew rubbed his hands till his knuckles cracked like fireworks. "I knew," he went on, "that if only you could get it into the right form, that dust would draw you back to the place it had come from. But the difficulty was getting it into the right form. My earlier experiments were all failures. I tried them on guinea pigs. Some of them only died. Some of them exploded like little bombs." "It was a jolly cruel thing to do," said Diggory, who had once had a guinea pig of his own. "How you do keep getting off the point," said Uncle Andrew. "That's what the creatures were for. I'd bought them myself. Let me see, where was I? Yes, at last I succeeded in making the rings, the yellow rings. But now a new difficulty arose. I was pretty sure now that a yellow ring would send any creature that touched it into another place. But what would be the good if I couldn't get them back to tell what they'd found there? And what about them, said Diggory. A nice mess they'd be in if they couldn't get back. You will keep on looking at everything from the wrong point of view, said Uncle Andrew, with a look of impatience. Can't you understand that the thing is a great experiment? The whole point of sending anyone to the other place is that I want to find out what it's like. Well, why didn't you go yourself, then? Diggory had hardly ever seen anyone look so surprised and offended as his uncle did at this simple question. Me? Me? He exclaimed. The boy must be mad. A man at my time of life, and in my state of health, to risk the shock and the dangers of being flung suddenly into a different universe. I never heard anything so preposterous in my life. Do you realize what you're saying? Think about what another world means. You might meet anything. Anything. And I suppose you've sent Polly into it, then, said Diggory. His cheeks were flaming with anger now. And all I can say, he added, even if you are my uncle, is that you've behaved like a coward, sending a girl into a place you're afraid to go yourself. Silence, sir, said Uncle Andrew, bringing his hand down on the table. I will not be talked to like that by a little dirty schoolboy. You don't understand. I am the great scholar, the magician, the adept, who is doing the experiment. Of course I need subjects to do it on. Bless my soul, you'll be telling me next that I ought to have asked the guinea pigs permission before I used them. No great wisdom can be reached without sacrifice, but the idea of going myself is ridiculous. It's like asking a general to fight as a common soldier. Suppose I got killed, what would become of my life's work? Oh, do stop jawing, said Diggory. Are you going to bring Polly back? I was going to tell you, when you so rudely interrupted me, said Uncle Andrew, that I did at last find a way of doing the return journey. The green rings draw you back. But Polly hasn't got a green ring. No, said Uncle Andrew with a cruel smile. Then she can't get back, shouted Diggory, and it's exactly the same as if you'd murdered her. She can get back, said Uncle Andrew, if someone else will go after her, wearing a yellow ring himself and take 2 green rings, one to bring himself back and the other to bring her back. And now, of course, Diggory saw the trap in which he was caught, and he stared at Uncle Andrew, saying nothing, with his mouth wide open. His cheeks had gone very pale. I hope, said Uncle Andrew, presently in a very high and mighty voice, just as if he were a perfect uncle who'd given one a handsome tip and some good advice. I hope, Diggory, that you are not given to showing the white feather. I should be very sorry to think that anyone of our family had not enough honor and chivalry to go to the aid of a lady in distress. Oh, shut up, said Diggory. If you had any honor at all, you'd be going yourself, but I know you won't. All right, I see I've got to go, but you are a beast. I suppose you planned the whole thing, so that she'd go without knowing it, and then I'd have to go after her. Of course, said Uncle Andrew, with his hateful smile. Very well, I'll go, but there's one thing I jolly well mean to say first. I didn't believe in magic till today. I see now it's real. Well, if it is, I suppose all the old fairy tales are more or less true, and you're simply a wicked, cruel magician, like the ones in the stories. Well, I've never read a story in which people of that sort weren't paid out in the end, and I bet you will be, and serve you right. Of all the things Diggory had said, this was the first that really went home. Uncle Andrew started, and there came over his face a look of such horror that, beast though he was, you could almost feel sorry for him. But a second later he smoothed it all away with a rather forced laugh. Well, well, I suppose that is a natural thing for a child to think. Brought up among women, as you have been, Old wives' tales, eh? I don't think you need to worry about my danger, Diggory. Wouldn't it be better to worry about the danger of your little friend? She's been gone some time. If there are any dangers over there, well, it would be a pity to arrive a moment too late. 1 sec. Okay. A lot you care, said Diggory fiercely, but I'm sick of this jaw. What have I got to do? You really must learn to control that temper of yours, my boy, said Uncle Andrew coolly. Otherwise you'll grow up like your Aunt Letty. Now, attend to me. He got up and put on a pair of gloves and walked over to the tray that contained the rings. They only work, he said, if they're actually touching your skin. Wearing gloves, I can pick them up, like this, and nothing happens. If you carried one in your pocket, nothing would happen, but of course you'd have to be careful not to put your hand in your pocket and touch it by accident. The moment you touch a yellow ring, you vanish out of this world. When you are in the other place, I expect, of course, this hasn't been tested yet, but I expect that the moment you touch a green ring, you vanish out of that world, and, I expect, reappear in this. Now I take these 2 green rings and drop them into your right-hand pocket. Remember very carefully which pocket the greens are in. G for green and R for right. GR, you see? Which are the first 2 letters of green. One for you and one for the little girl. And now you pick up a yellow one for yourself. I should put it on your finger if I were you. There'll be less chance of dropping it. Diggory had almost picked up the yellow ring when he suddenly checked himself. Look here, he said. What about Mother? Suppose she asks where I am. The sooner you go, the sooner you'll be back, said Uncle Andrew cheerfully. But you don't really know whether I can get back. Uncle Andrew shrugged his shoulders, walked across the door and unlocked it, and threw it open and said, Oh, very well then, just as you please. Go down and have your dinner. Leave the little girl to be eaten by wild animals, or drowned, or starved in the other world, or lost there for good, if that's what you prefer. It's all one to me. Perhaps before tea time you'd better drop in on Mrs. Plummer and explain that she'll never see her daughter again because you were afraid to put on a ring. By gum, said Diggory, don't I just wish I was big enough to punch your head. Then he buttoned up his coat, took a deep breath, and picked up the ring. And he thought then, as he always thought afterward too, that he could not decently have done anything else. And that is the end of Chapter 2. Voice is getting a little tired, so we are going to leave it there for the night. I hope you liked all of that. Next time I'll be doing this either on Thursday night or Friday night. It'll depend on what I've got going on. But yeah, I'll make sure that the video is up before too long. But otherwise, though, good night, everybody.